Hi, everybody. It's Tevis, and welcome to a very exciting Game Changer chat. As you guys know, or maybe don't know, I started this series to support my book, The Game Changer's Guide to Radical Success. And the book and these conversations are all intended to light that fire, to expose us all to what is amazing and real and triumphant about each other's journey, both in game changing our own lives and then in being a game changer in the world. And so before we dive in with my guest, I want to give you just a couple of tech reminders. We are simul streaming across 3 or 4 platforms, and that means that I really encourage you to put comments, say hi in the chat. And if we don't answer real time, it's not because it's not a cool comment or not a cool hello, but it's because somehow in the tech universe of the world, we're not seeing your comment. But both me and my guest, Stanfield Gray, who I'm about to introduce, promise to circle back afterwards and answer any questions or comments that you might have. So I'm going to pull him in here. Stanfield Gray, who ironically we figured out we've known each other for well over 20 years, which means we met when we were 5. Ironically, Stan came back into my life as a professional because of what he is doing now. But he and I met early on at the University of South Carolina. He was an undergrad, and I was a very, let's just say, overachiever going to grad school at the MIBS program. And I just remember we had some fabulous conversations. So when, through happenstance, through his activities and being a founder, a co-founder, along with his wonderful, amazing, and brilliant wife, Sunny, of Dig South, I ended up on his stage. And we kind of put 2 and 2 together and figured out, wow, we've known each other for a long time. So without further ado, this is my guest, Stanfield Gray. I call him Stan a lot. I hope that's okay. Is that okay for me to call you
Stan is fine. Hey, Tevis. Hello, streaming world. Yeah,
Hi,
I mean,
streaming
really,
world.
yeah, I mean, all the world's a stage, right? So whatever stage you're in, whatever stage we're on, it all leads us back here. So
It
that's
all
great.
leads us
Yeah,
hopefully into a good conversation, no matter what the stage is. Before we came
absolutely.
on, Stan and I were talking about how sometimes the expectations in the business world is that we're going to come on and we're going to do the blah 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 and here's my credentials, and how neither of us really have an appetite for that kind of conversation. It just seems really stiff. And so I'm going to start out with Stan the way I love to start out with everyone, and that is, Stan, when you were a little one, what did you most love spending time doing?
Wow. Everything. That's a great question. So it's fun. Yeah, I was reflecting on this lately because we lived out in the county. So we weren't in the city and we weren't in a neighborhood. And eventually the suburbs kind of came toward us in Spartanburg, South Carolina.
Yeah.
And, I remember spending a lot of time in the woods, building trails. I had a motorcycle, I could ride it all over the place. And it was fun, but I was always irritated that, I had to have my mom drop me off, or I had to spend the night somewhere to be around kind of a posse of other kids, roaming the neighborhood. And that was frustrating. But today I'm really glad I had that experience in a different way, because it was more unique, putting a tent in the backyard, and we had big bonfire parties on our property. And as I got older, I really appreciated different aspects of that. So, it's fun to sort of reverse engineer, or, write your own revisionist history on your impression of something that changed over time. And now it's great. But my 12 but my 10-year-old self can still remember, I'm stuck here in the middle of nowhere. Help me.
Damn it. I just want to go play cops and robbers with other kids in a street somewhere.
Where are all the other kids?
Yeah, really. Is this the rest of my life alone in the woods like Thoreau?
Yeah. And it was a very long bus ride out to the house.
I believe it. Well,
that's good from school.
What did you think you would be when you grew up?
So initially, I thought I was going to be honestly a musician. I wanted to be a rock star. I wanted to be like Mick and Keith, and especially Pete Townsend. Who he was my big hero when I was 13, 14 years old. And I've always, my parents will tell you how argumentative I was. I loved ideas and to debate as well. And everybody reads To Kill a Mockingbird, thinks they're going to be a lawyer for 5 minutes. And sure. I did have that vision for a while, that I was going to be this kind of, trial lawyer, and that was going to be really fascinating. And then later in life, I learned I didn't love the law as much as I thought I did. And after working for a couple law firms, and that was fine.
Yeah, that'll
but I think
anybody.
Yeah, early on, I think I just wanted to find different modes of expression, whether that was being writing. I've worked for magazines and newspapers. I still play in bands, so that was really fun. I just wanted to find ways to kind of express what I was feeling through different genres and different mediums.
Well, you seem to have carried that sense of poetry, right, throughout your life. Like, I know that you were a fan of the beat poets, but this theme of expression, right, this theme of drawing from the marrow, right, into the world seems to be a constant for you. And I'm just curious if you think that time alone in the woods might have deepened that ability to even care about an inner voice.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, sometimes when you're forced into, I wouldn't call it isolation, because it wasn't like it was desperate or anything like that. But having that space, that mental space to kind of, let your mind wander and think deeper about subjects or what's going on in your life, I think is important. And today it's extremely hard to carve out a moment without a million distractions. And everybody's trying to meditate or pray or whatever they do to get those moments. But even that feels artificial. Like, why am I having to force myself to carve out that kind of time? Because it's very hard to get.
That is a really good comment, right? That we have to set aside time just to be with ourselves, as opposed to being with ourselves and then making time for the extrinsic stimulus. Like, that's a really good point, because it seems in some ways it's almost a juxtaposition, exactly the opposite of what might have been true of culture through the millennia, in some ways, right? I'm curious though, because at some point, right, this guy who loves poetry and loves the beats and is a musician and wants to be Stan Townsend.
Right.
At some point he said, okay, I'm not going to be the Atticus Finch of Spartanburg. I'm going to go into the business world. And just kind of, there's this assumption, I think, oftentimes that the folks who come from a creative or let's call it a liberal arts, it's really a dated term, but let's just go ahead and call it that, background, that they almost have an aversion to going into business. But then again, the argument is also, well, if you study the liberal arts and creativity, then you have powers of reasoning and access to self-mastery that may not come from a business kind of a tutelage, right, growing up. And I'm just curious, when you started to realize that this path of you being this rugged, creator was going to lead you to business, what was that like? Because a lot of people are asking themselves these very questions right now. Am I a business person? Am I a creator? So what was that for you?
That's a really big 8-part question. I think you just asked.
I'm bad at that.
No, that's fine. Let me frame it this way. Without sounding corny, I realized that my life has been a continuous festival or conference. Let me say what I'm.
Festival. I like festival a lot.
Yeah. So
conference sounds like this.
Right. And what I mean by that is, we all start off going to like some rock shows or different types of festivals like that. And then, when I look back over time, I started throwing, bonfire parties with a band in my backyard when I was 15 years old. in high school. And then I started kind of following bands, sometimes on tour. And then I worked in the music business for Spin Magazine, and then for a producer, Dennis Herring at Sweet Tea, and who produced, Elvis Costello, Buddy Guy, a bunch of great artists. And I worked for Living Blues Magazine. And so I kept bouncing around to all these different things that were on the periphery of music and big ideas and literature. And then, I wound up in Charleston while playing in a band and worked for the College of Charleston. And then even when I, fell into the projects at the college, I ended up managing event marketing and producing the Bully Pulpit series and presidential communication, where we hosted Barack Obama and John McCain and Ron Paul and all of these candidates.
I all three bases. That was very smart. Anyway,
and then, the Colbert Report. We had Stephen Colbert on the Cistern Yard, and so I produced location scouting, for film and television. And then I went to the Ad Age Digital Conference in New York and South by Southwest. I launched Dig South as a sort of mini version of that South by event, with the idea of connecting leading global brands to scalable startups, so that our kids, at the time, mine were 4 and 6 years old, would have the ability to launch, scale a company here, or their ideas, whatever they manifest as creators or as business people, into something very real and tangible. And so I've always been the person, kind of the circus master, or the one who says, okay, let's whip all this together. But as I got older, I figured out a way to blend the ideas behind that, the ideas that creators have and business people have, and put those on a stage and project them. And I found that to be every bit as much exciting and fun as writing a song or writing a screenplay or, writing a novel. In any of those other disciplines or art forms, I found it just as exciting to find a way for people to present those ideas. And so, and over time, I think if you do it in the right way and you're working with creatives, turning a creative project into a business is extremely fulfilling and rewarding. And then you can sustain your livelihood in the way that you would like to live it. And, potentially, as especially a lot of entrepreneurs and founders are people who simply would fail working. I was not good working in a big corporate environment. It's really not conducive to my talents and what I enjoy doing. I can do it. Sure, I can perform on that level, but I'm miserable while I'm doing it. And I found that a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of founders, whether they view themselves as creators or business people, have that sort of similar thing going on, where, and some of it may just be we're control freaks, but I think it's more than that. I really think it's, we're trying to manifest something in a way that is very, very difficult to do. And there's too much bureaucracy, too many roadblocks, too many doors that are closed every day on those things. And we want to test them, and testing them in the marketplace is pretty exciting. It's fun. You want that reward and feedback. Sometimes it's amazing to create something and maybe people don't love it, but you are just, it's a good thing. Mm-hmm. It's cool. And it's fine that 10 people liked it versus 10 million, but so I don't know if that answers your question, but my life has been this continuous series of festivals and events that for me, that originated with great ideas that needed to be shared, needed to be expressed.
So it started out with expressing your own creativity, and then it turned into supporting other people expressing theirs, and that evolved into various genres of idea expression. So Well, I just want to say, I think you did an awesome job, because I did give you an 8-part question. You did give me an 8-part answer. So we're like tracking.
Thanks, Tevis.
Right along. Right.
Well, and another part of my personality that, I shared this with you in the kind of Q&A you sent me, or, for where you wanted some background information, is I'm not a firm believer in really strict disciplines. Disciplines are necessary if you're a surgeon, or you have to do certain things in certain fields. But even if you're a surgeon, I think you're learning from a wide array of sources and journals and inspiration that's also never changing. But I see this cross-pollination, these segues, these things that emerge and pop up. They're recurring themes that are archetypes, and they're perennial, and they're like, And it doesn't matter if you're making a film or you're making an album or you're producing a great event, a festival, or even in your business, you're going to see these things around the corner that blend together. And you're like, I feel just like that guy, even though, or I feel just like that woman, but we live in two different countries. We have two different professions, but there are certain themes that ripple through everything.
It's such an archetypal viewpoint. And I'm thinking about what a poster child you are in many ways for what a lot of people are sitting with in this moment. And you had to have an appetite for risk, point one. And you also had to have patience, because you said something huge. You said a lot of times you'll have an idea, and even if no one gets it, if you in your gut know this is good, this is right, this is true, you keep going with it. And I think that's a really rare talent. In fact, I was talking to a friend about this now, because our feedback loops are so immediate, right? We put stuff up on social, we see how many likes we get, et cetera, et cetera. We're actually almost addicted to this idea that if something has merit, that we're going to be able to measure it almost immediately. And I'm just curious, because you're in a space that's both a futurist space, right? But it's also sharing ideas over social, sharing ideas, hopefully helping people get them funded, right? So the feedback loops are still really in play. And how do you navigate the disposability of ideas in this kind of a culture when your gut is telling you keep going? Like, how do you sit with that? Because there's a lot of pressure.
That's a great question. So I would have to, I would have to offer the caveat that I have 10 to 100 times more ideas that fall on their face than the ones that are great and succeed. And I think you just have to have that many at bats. You just keep going and keep going. And I have plenty that I fought for that turned out not to be great ideas later, or the timing wasn't right, or my approach to it. Maybe the idea was right, but I didn't refine it. I didn't put together the right team around it. So that's part of the reiterating on all of those ideas and concepts and framing them around either a business or an event or whatever that project might look like. So go ahead.
So how do you pick the ones to double down on? The ones that maybe are like, is that just spidey sense or?
Well, if it's a business, the market will tell you, hey, nobody wants to buy this, product. And it gets real very fast unless you have unlimited resources, which I don't. And I did not when I launched Dig South. It was like all or nothing, bro, go for broke. But the risk, a lot of times it's become sort of a cliche, but it is often a greater risk not to do it than it is to take the leap, because you have to live with that and the frustration and just kind of what it can do to yourself internally. If you don't do it, often has a much more negative impact than if you took the leap and you failed. Well, you tried and you just, get back on the horse and ride again.
Oh, God. This is like the textbook definition of resilience, right? It's like,
right. And that's our theme for next year is resilience, so perfect segue. Yeah. So for Dig South Tech Summit, this is our 10th year, and the theme is resilience and grit. Everybody's struggling through that in the pandemic, but also anybody who's been at something for a very long time trying to make it succeed has to be resilient. I think, to use a metaphor, let's use one of my yards. So we've got this is a funny story. My son, when he was about 3 or 4 years old, we were planting some flowers outside, and we had these packs of sunflower seeds. And my daughter, was taking care of trying to do her plants. And we gave them to my son, and he took them in his fist, and he ran across the backyard, and he just threw them into this big patch of woods, right? And so my daughter's, she tried to carefully plant these things. Nothing grew. His flowers went crazy. And we now, I kid you not, probably have 300 sunflowers in the backyard that grew from him just hurling them into the wind, into the air. And they took root.
Yeah.
And then in the front yard, we have this orange tree. So the sunflowers, they take many months to grow, but then they only bloom for like a week, the type we have, and then they just keel over. We have this orange tree that produces an orange that will grow on that vine for months and months and months. So trying to distinguish between the things that are worth nurturing for months and waiting on that fruit versus the other thing that's going to be amazing, beautiful, but it's going to flame out in 7 to 10 days. And, you know, and finding the thrill of both of those, I think, is really fun. But it's that for me is like a good metaphor for business. Okay, this one is real and it's good, but here's the shelf life. You got to go in and out. This one, you know, you're going to have doubters at the beginning, and then people aren't going to understand, especially if you're an early adopter or you're a person trying to do something that's unfamiliar to that environment or space where you live, and people aren't going to understand it until you've had time to nurture it and grow it. And that's kind of what happened with Dig South. I mean, people forget, but the Apple Store only launched in like 2007 and was open to outside developers in 2008. I launched the first mobile app for the College of Charleston shortly after that. And then I had the idea for Dig South in 2011, but that was, no one thought like the digital economy was going to roar like it did. I won't say no one, but many people, especially in the South, you know, we tend to be late bloomers here in terms of the digital economy, especially. You know, people were like, why would you do this kind of event here? Are there enough tech companies? Does anybody even make software, you know, in Raleigh and Charleston, Atlanta, and these places? And yes, people were already doing that. There were successful companies, but there are only a few of them, a handful. And, you know, I just knew it was pretty obvious if it's already happening in Silicon Valley and Boston and New York, eventually it's going to come, you know, to your town too. Yeah. And it's going to roar through in a way that, you know, is very remarkable. So, you know, in that sense, it was pretty fun and exciting knowing, okay, if I can hang on long enough and grow this from a small thing, then it will turn into something really interesting along the way. And of course, you know, and I'm not saying I was the only one in Charleston at all. There were dozens of other people that, you know, had understood the spirit of what we were doing. But today it just seems painfully obvious these kind of events are everywhere. Everybody's got a venture conference. Everybody's got, you know, a technology, digital economy event all over the Southeast, really common. But, you know, in 2011, very few, not so much. Yeah. Or, you know.
Stan, so you're playing a long game and you came into this early, like as you pointed out back in 2011. You've had to have gotten frustrated at times.
Every year, every time well, you know, I'd say, I mean, so Dig South in a nutshell is the summit that we launched initially, the Dig South Tech Summit. It's an annual event. And then we have Dig Nation, our membership group that's year-round engagement. Yep. And then we have a Dig South Tech Media company where we produce our, you know, podcasts, our blog and articles and, you know, content collaboration with our members and other partners. And so, you know, yes, I'm infinitely frustrated all the time, every day about what, you know, what does or doesn't work. And it's not, you know, what it turned out to be is I thought it was going to be this, I was going to keep growing the big festival and it'd be like 10,000 people and that sort of thing. And I learned over time that wasn't what I really wanted to do. And it wasn't what this market could support, you know, where I live. So I had to be very realistic about it. I wasn't willing to move to a much bigger market, take on a lot of debt, which, you know, a lot of people do to launch an event of that scale. Yeah. But I found it to be a lot more interesting, a lot more fun to do, you really go deep with fewer people and really stay connected to them throughout the year, build relationships like I have with you and Samantha Furster and Carrie Jackwith, and, you know, people who are good friends of mine and they're really deep thinkers and they're exciting. And I love putting them on a stage and I love, you know, having a beer with them you know, by the waterfront. So I couldn't,
that's classic, like hero's journey stuff, right? Where you, you know, set out on your mission, right? And you think you're going here, and through the trial and error, right? Through the trials, right? Moving into the unknown, you wake up one day and you're like, well, I thought I was going to be the next Southeast or South by Southeast, right? But what I realized is that I'm really motivated by going deep. I'm really motivated by unearthing powerful ideas that can move the world, for lack of a better, it sounds really grandiose, but that's what ideas do. And when you think about where you're headed now, right, because you are a futurist, when you look at the landscape of the world and you hear things like we've got 8 years left before global warming does what it does, right? What's like you continuing on that journey and moving into the unknown? You've got 3 companies now. I know you do consulting on the side. People tap you for your insights all the time. What do you feel like is really coming to surface now?
Another enormous question. I love it, Tevis.
Singers.
Yeah, I mean, I was a huge.
Can I show you guys something?
Yes.
This is crazy. This is a rainstorm.
Wow. I love it.
It was sunshiny. Yeah, this is the cinema verite game changer chat. If we lose power, you are forewarned. But anyway.
Well, I was a huge fan of Joseph Campbell in college and the hero's journey. And I loved this punk band, the Minutemen, and they had this great album, What Makes a Man Build a Fire, and I thought that was such a cool title. And, thinking in terms of technology and sustainability, one of the earliest myths is man stealing fire and bringing it down to earth, and using it to power technology. And so I do think we can invent our way out of a lot of things if we have the collective will to do so. So I have a lot of faith in that. I also sometimes believe the earth just will heal itself by attrition. Like sometimes maybe COVID is part of the way of just saying, hey, there are too many of us doing this, in a way that's harmful. It's no longer an isolated world. No matter what it is traveling around, and you reap what you sow. Maybe that's part of looking at it from a sort of a 30,000 foot view and thinking about mankind. And at the same time, I'm really conflicted sometimes about this idea of we need to go to Mars, without fixing certain things here or paying more attention. But then again, maybe if we don't push into space, a giant asteroid comes 1,000 years from now and we're not prepared, to get off of the earth. And that takes a long time. So, I'm willing to be, what I'm saying is I can appreciate the origin story and the end of time, the apocalyptic story from 100 different perspectives and angles. And that's really fun. But if I have to boil that back down to today, I think we do need to wake up and think more about our impact on the earth and on each other. And we've all made mistakes, and maybe we need to be a little more compassionate and be, show more forgiveness toward everyone in general, and just kind of chill out a bit and think more about how we can be a force for good, And
you said 2 things I really love. One is when the folks started going up into space recently, I immediately was thrown back into Gil Scott Heron's Writing on the Moon, and I posted it because it's just so brilliant. Like my sister's been bitten by a rat and she can't get health care, right? And
Writing on the Moon, that's an incredible song. I can't believe more people don't know, but it's genius.
Well, I'm pushing. That's one thing. The other thing is this thought of reaping what you sow, right? And it sounds biblical, but if you study the Bible, a lot of the Bible comes from the agrarian and earth-based cultures that the Bible happened in, right? And so it's kind of just like what you were talking about with your son and your daughter, right? He scatters the seeds and she doesn't get what she wants, but then there's this orange tree, right? And when I think about your theme coming up next year around resilience, it seems like there's really an allegory there, because reaping what you sow is really about karma, of course. But so is resilience. Resilience is the physical, the human experience, or the life cycle experience of reaping what you sow, and karma. So it seems like you've got a really great theme through which to invite people to ask themselves, like, what is my 7-generation plan, right? Like what is the impact my efforts are going to have, hopefully, for whoever is around in 7 generations.
Yeah. I mean, it's really important to have a framework sometimes, just to know where you are in the world, to orient yourself. And those can be very useful, but it's also important to know that there's a lot that exists beyond that frame that is equally viable and can get you there.
So great. A frame is the beginning, not the end, right? The frame is the platform. It's not the container. And I think a lot of times we forget that if we start out with a framework and that becomes our only point of reference. It's kind of like the idea of the contrast between a map and reality. And a map has to be an extraction. It has to be an expression, right? It can't be perfect, or it would be reality itself. And I just really applaud you that you're bringing that kind of sensibility into business conversations, because it really is the essence of applying creativity theory to how we're going to continue to move the world forward from a productivity and a commerce standpoint. So I'm a huge fan.
Thank you, Tevis.
I really hope that
I'm a huge fan of yours. I do have one question. I don't know when you're going to kick me off, but I do have one question. Were you tempted for a second to call it the Game Changer's Guide to Rad Success?
So in college,
as an old skateboarder and BMXer, I had to ask.
Wait. In college, for any of my college buddies, I went to UT. And if you went to UT in the years I went, I think I graduated. God, what year did I graduate? 90, I think. Yeah. I'm old. I'm really, really, really old.
No. You're incredibly youthful. Yeah.
Well, so there was a house in Fort Sanders, for all my Fort Sanders peeps. There was a house that had this giant half pipe that a bunch of our friends had built. And it was taller than my house is now. And all the kids would get together there. And I was terrified of skateboards because I had a bad fight with some asphalt as a little one. But but my boyfriend at the time, well, kind of not boyfriend, but he wanted to be my boyfriend. Anyway, his name was Radam. Right. Everyone called him Radam. His name was Adam. So it's funny because I have oftentimes thought to myself, radicals, like rad. Anyway, and you're the first person to ever ask me that. So thank you for taking me back to my roots. So Stan, last question, and we're over time, but whatever. It's free.
All right. There's no hook coming to pull me off.
There's no hook for either of us. So stigma, right? Stigma around the South, right? I grew up there, and I've lived all over the world, and I know that there are narrow-minded people and there are open-hearted people everywhere you go, right? And I know that there's a lot of generational stuff that exists in any community, right? And to deny that it obviously has stronger expression in the South would be equally as obtuse. I'm curious, when you think about what you would like people to understand about the South, what would it be?
I'm so glad. I'm really glad you asked this question, because I was talking about this with my wife, with Sunny, yesterday. Yeah. And so, all right, here's one of the things that I find really interesting is there's still shows out there, and the tropes and the cliches about the South. It's always about barbecue and pork and true South and all that stuff is great. It's fantastic. And, I have ancestors that were here during the colonial period. I mean, very deep roots all across the South. And but I knew a lot of people who were into like XTC and British bands and INXS and obscure music, obscure film, Fellini, you name it. so many people that I grew up with, really interesting, exciting ideas, things they were doing that don't fit into the nice media TV trope of football, barbecue, etc. And I'm not knocking those things at all. Those are amazing, cool things. But in my mind, there is another true South, one just as true, just as interesting, that involves people who are much more multicultural, in their thinking and their approach to the world. And I know that's a buzzword, but what I mean by that is they're just open to any and all ideas and how that manifests. And it's not like a left coast thing that arrives here. It's strange how many Europeans and people from around the world that immigrated to the US and then gave up their language and their history and their culture, to assimilate. And I understand how that came about and why you need to, have the fabric of a nation during certain time periods come together. But I think there are things worth exploring that are really interesting, that are just as Southern to me as, quilts and pork rinds and football and RC Cola or whatever, all those
tea
and sweet tea and all those things. And those are fine, but there are a lot of people kind of hidden or sort of that are woven into the same fabric that aren't being paid any attention to, and that aren't, oh, that's not Southern. Why isn't it? We've been doing this for 3 generations. Of course it is. It's just as viable and valid. So yeah, I've been questioning that a lot lately. And in undergraduate, I was an English major and I went to Ole Miss for grad school and I got a degree in Southern studies. And typically when you say that, people think, oh, you studied, Southern history and just the Civil War. That was an aspect of it, the civil rights movement as well, of course, part of it. But in my mind, studying the South was studying, where is the South going? Where is it today? Why does it always mean looking backwards, necessarily? And so, I thought of it like being as the Southern futurist, and that's what I set up a Twitter handle as that. And it's so bizarre saying that because it sounds like an oxymoron or like a paradox, I guess would be a better way to look at it, but it really isn't. Why wouldn't you look ahead and dream of a different way to do things in the South as well as anywhere else you might live? I don't find that to be strange or unusual. I find it more unusual that we want to lock people into these little prisms that are only the things that are, checked off as being, the guide to being a Southerner or whatnot, and many of the things I already named. So anyway, I'm rambling here at this point, but I'm really fascinated by this topic, and I'd love to talk to more people who feel the same way. And I'm not hostile toward any of those traditions at all. I have a deep love and respect for all of them. I just think that they're only one facet or aspect of what it means to live in the South and be a Southerner, and that there is a whole undiscovered world out there that really gets short shrift.
Back to the reductive maps, right? To the reductive framework. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for being larger than any one of your frameworks, because that's really clear. You're more than a Pete Townsend. You're more than a bee poet. You're more than
Tevis.
An event organizer. And thank you, because I hope others who are looking deep inside themselves, asking themselves what they are capable of, are inspired by you giving yourself permission to be all the things that you are. So thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm really grateful.
Thank you, Tevis. Just being here with you and just getting to do this is really an amazing, moment that you don't get very often. So thank you.
I love these. Believe me, people ask me all the time, why do you do these game changer chats? I'm like, because I get to talk to smart people. And it's a treat. Right, it's fun. Right. Okay.
Well, it's fun. Yeah.
So here's my short commercial. If you haven't read my book, it was just called by Forbes one of the top 12 books for compassionate leadership, alongside Saint Brene Brown, as she is called, and a bunch of other super smart people. It is really a great tool to help you give yourself the kind of permission that Stan gives himself. And I will say, mostly game changers, people who are already game change, have gotten this, because we know that it takes discipline to stay true to yourself. It is not a part-time thing, and it's not a one-time thing. It's something that you do over and over and over again. So pick up my book. If you want to hang out with me and a bunch of other smart people in exploring it, I am starting a mastermind this fall, and I'll be taking a really small group through it. Everyone who's done it is like, oh my God. So that's my humble plug. I do have someone coming next week. Oh, I'm so bad at remembering who I've booked. But I'm sure they will be amazing, and you will be really glad you put it on your calendar. So you guys have a great evening. Please comment, please like, please share. If you have friends in your life who are like, I don't know what to do next, tell them to watch a couple of these. Because every time I watch one, I'm like, oh yeah. So thank you, Stan. And thanks everyone for being here tonight.
Thank you, Tevis.